I would like to talk, Flavio, about how grateful you are and the joy that we have in our hearts to have you as our special guest today. Feel all our blessings to you now, and hoping that the lecture you are presenting to us, we hope really that we will have lots to learn with you about forgive for our lives to be better. And well, to everybody who doesn't know Flavio, Flavio is from Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States, and he told us that he is for 70 years around now in the Spiritist movement, and he has worked in the board of the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts. And also, he told us that in different positions, and also in the Spiritist Council in the United States, as programs director, I'm copying here. And also lately, he has helped to found the Spiritist Institute. That's very interesting for all of us because it's a non-profit dedicated to disseminate Spiritism in English. So for us, it's a very important project of yours. And lately, it has been a pleasure to hear you, Flavio, in the Spiritist talks. Your presence, always joyful, always light presence, but always introducing deep reflection in the Spiritist talks, and we really like to hear you there. And chiefly, one of my favorites lately is music and spirituality, that I learned a lot with you guys there. Okay. For the ones who don't know, Flavio is a translator of many, in a group of Spiritists together, of many printed Spiritist materials. And also he is a simultaneous translation for his fast way of being, that he can be a simultaneous translation. As I told him, I cannot because I'm too slow for that. Okay, so and professionally, Flavio is an engineer, manager, working for a multinational telecommunications company. He holds a Bachelor in Science in Engineering, a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, and a Master degree in International Management and Business Operations. And finally, but not least important, I would say most importantly, he is a husband and a proud father of twin girls who lately have turned 8, as he told me. So now you see a little, you know a little bit about Flavio, and we are willing to hear what you have to say to us today. And please, now I would leave the stage, and it's all yours, okay? Thank you so much, Flavio.
Thank you, Venda, for the lovely introduction. Thank you guys for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to spend a few minutes with like-minded individuals that are looking to study and get to know a little more about Spiritism, which is a passion of my life, right? So thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'd like to start by trying to share my screen with you guys, if that's okay. Oh, my lovely girl just brought me water. That's awesome. You want to say hi? Say hi. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Say hello. Okay.
Thank you for sharing your dad with us.
Oh. Bye-bye. Good night. Yeah, that's awesome. Bye, honey. Ciao, ciao. So, anyways, thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with like-minded individuals to get to know a little more about Spiritism. I'd like to try to share my screen, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I think I can already do it. So let's see. Let's give you a little test to see if that works okay. So give me 1 second. Let me see what I can share. I'm gonna try to share my desktop number 2 because I have several monitors here, so that's a little interesting. Let me see. What can you guys see? Oh, I cannot see you anymore. What can you guys see, folks?
we can see a screen written "Forgive more and live better."
I think your slides are on.
You can see only one screen, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, that works okay. Yeah, because before, for some reason, I was sharing one screen and folks were seeing 2 screens. So let's get started. So before we start, I'd like to still really, involve in this beautiful prayer and raise our thoughts to our Master Jesus, so that He may really bring our hearts at peace, enlighten our minds, so that we can really get to know a little more about the gospel, the teachings, with the same interest, motivation, dedication that we put in place in order to put that the content for you guys. So the idea that I have here is to talk about forgiveness and make a hypothesis that for folks that forgive more, they live better. That's the hypothesis that I'm raising with you guys. So in order for us to get started, right, to live better or well-being in general, right, I would say it's that state of being happy, healthy, and prosperous, right? And who doesn't want to be healthy, prosperous, and happy? All of us, correct? So this is the recipe, folks, that we learn through Christianity, through Spiritism, for a better life. In order for us to have better lives, we have to forgive more. Allow me to start with a case or a story that happened in the early 1900s. So in the beginning of last century, something very tragic happened in our society, right? Which was the Armenian genocide. 1.5 million people were decimated by the Ottoman Empire, right? Also known as the Armenian Holocaust for a lot of historians, right? So the story that I'm going to tell here happened in this very small, mountain village where a captain from the Turkish army was conquering different parts of the land, right? And then he was looking for that particular place, which was high up in the mountains, and he was looking to get, conquer that farm. When this captain enters that house, right, he found a family with, 2 parents and a brother and a sister. And he committed, some atrocities that I'm going to summarize for us not to really focus on the activity, but in a nutshell, right? He raped the little girl. She was 14 years old. He killed her brother in front of her. Then he killed both of her parents, still in front of her. And then he thought he had killed her before he left the house. He left the house and continued, right, his, conquering more locations and places and whatnot. And then he kept her as his sexual slave for a couple of more years. Luckily, she was able to escape. And then decade, goes by, 10 years later, right, she becomes a nurse in this hospital, right? The war was coming to an end. And then this captain, who was now promoted to colonel, right, was injured in a battle. He was severely injured. And then once they take him to the hospital, right? He was in really bad shape, as you can imagine, right? Any, war wounds, battle wounds, they're not, the easiest ones to recover. So once he gets to the hospital, right, the folks that were, accompanying him were together with him, ask, everybody, how we need to take care of the colonel, he's our commander, we got to do something. And then the chief nurse, who was in charge at the hospital at that time, said, I have the perfect nurse to take care of him. Of course, totally unbeknownst to her, she invited that same little girl that used to be, that was raped by him, that was a sexual slave through a couple of years, for a couple of years. This is 10 plus years after that, right? Nobody had any idea of what had happened before. And then he is taken to her care. She provides an exceptional care throughout his recovery, right? She spends numerous hours talking to him, trying to getting, taking care of his wounds, his band-aids, and all those things, to the point that he is recovering, right? He is almost recovered. And then the time or the day that he was being discharged from the hospital, before he left, he goes back to the chief nurse and says, nurse, I want to say thank you for that woman who took care of me. Can you call her, please? And she goes, sure, I can call her. So she called the nurse. Then she said, I just want to say thank you. And the nurse started talking to him, right? No problem. I'm happy I was able to care for you, sir. And when he heard her voice, now he was fully awake, right? All the sedation was gone, and right, he was fully, 100% conscious. When she started talking, he connected her voice with that little girl that he did some very bad things to. And then he comes into a shock. And then he asked her, why didn't you let me die? Why did you take care? Did you take such good care of me to the point that I owe you my life now? Why did you do that? And then in a symbol of, she opened her palms and said, because that one that I follow taught me to forgive no matter what. Those were his last words to all of us Christians. She said that. And then, as you can imagine, she gave him that amazing lesson of forgiveness. So that lesson is described in this book called Unconditional Forgiveness, or the call of Jesus to radical forgiveness. And it's written by this pastor called Brian Zend, whom we have had the pleasure to talk to and spend a couple of hours sharing a few moments. You may have heard his name before because our dear Divaldo shares a lot of stories that Brian talks about it. I was told this book is now available in other languages. It was originally only in English. It's an American, pastor. But the point I'm trying to make here, folks, is that look at this level of forgiveness. Look at how much she had to forgive. If we were on her shoes, would we be able to forgive as much? If we had similar situation, would we be able to forgive? And actually, that's the question that I have to ask all of us, right? How can I forgive when it hurts so much? And yes, we know it hurts. We know it's difficult, right? We know it's sometimes we don't even understand, right? The possibility of forgiving. Nevertheless, Jesus himself asked us to forgive. He asked our dear Lord to forgive all those criminals that were putting him on the cross. I would like to say that forgiveness is the most important piece of the gospel. Without forgiveness, right, it will be very difficult, albeit impossible, to really comprehend the gospel. This is what a lot of historians and biographers talk about Christianity in general, that forgiveness is the most important tenet of what we're trying to do and learn, and so much, right? So when we look at, do we need to wait until something as tragic or drastic like that to happen for us to forgive? Probably not, right? We shouldn't really wait. That we should be forgiving the smallest, the littlest things that happen to all of us every day, all the time, right? So hopefully in the next few minutes, I'd like to show and bring some content that may be helpful for all of us to look at forgiveness with a different set of eyes, right? Of course, in the example of the Armenian nurse, which is one exaggeration of forgiveness, right? We have an amazing role model for us to forgive. What I tell myself all the time is, Flavio, she was able to forgive that captain, that colonel. You can't forgive anything, right? That's what I tell myself all the time. If something happens to me or something that I'm not really, a big fan of it, and then I tell that myself all the time. I go back to the story. I reread this. I've read that story many, many times. And I invite you all to buy the book. It's an amazing story. Of course, we don't have enough time to go all the details here, but it's a great story that really, falls into a lot of huge motivational for all of us. So, continuing, right? So, when I look at forgiveness, it's also important to look at the opposite of that. So, when somebody does something bad to us, right? What's usually the first sentiment that happens? Is it forgiveness or is it revenge? I would suggest is that it's usually revenge, right? We're still, imperfect beings. I don't see any really wings behind anybody here. So we're all in the same, evolutionary, situation, so to speak. So we're all learning, we're all moving, together, right? We're all marching together. And I'd like to say that, unfortunately, that's actually what happens, right? Sometimes, actually, the first emotion, right? It's really revenge. But how do we change from that angry face in red versus that pumping, really heart that it's in pink, right? So the importance of forgiveness is to really understand, right? And hold that toxic blame of revenge, right? That oftentimes, or if not all the times, right? Every time we fall into the revenge category, we incur into ourselves emotional damage, right? And of course, we know it's definitely not okay. So allow me to share a couple of pieces that are in this great book by Dr. Brian Adams. And he talks about a couple of things, a couple of steps that we follow through every time somebody does something that's really bad or we feel it's not right or just. So he says, when somebody does some harm and there was hurt or hurt is inflicted, right? Somebody offends us, somebody calls, our mother ugly, right? Whatever it is that somebody does to us, right? We see that. Notice that it's usually a person doing that to us. We don't ever get mad. I know Vancouver doesn't snow a lot, but we don't ever get mad here in Boston when we have, 40 centimeters of snow. That's nature. It's God. I mean, it is what it is. We have to, put up with, right? I mean, but when somebody does something bad, then it's a totally different story. Notice that little interesting detail that we never really seek revenge to God or to nature, right? It's never like that. It's usually when a person does some harm or really hurts us or whatnot. Then, following the steps that Dr. Adams suggests, he says that we conclude that it was caused by somebody else. I didn't do that to myself. I didn't deserve it, right? The next step is this was not fair, it was unjust, right? And then we feel the desire to retaliate. Folks, that's all of us, right? That are immortal beings. All of us, we follow these same steps every time somebody does something bad to us, right? So, but again, that's a normal process. The question that I have for all of us is, how do we move from revenge to, guess what? Forgiveness, right? How do we move from feeling, hey, this is not fair. How come did she say that to me or about me? Or how come did he do this and that? And we would like to find a lot of excuses. But at the end of the day, right, we feel it's something not right. It's something that's not fair, right? Now something harmful has happened to us, so to speak. But then if we go back to Jesus, and Jesus says, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. That's written in Matthew chapter 18, verses 22. And I think it's important for us to decipher what Jesus was saying here, because he was honestly saying, you don't have to forgive up to 7 times. Why does he mention 7 times? Because in the Judeo, faith, or in Judaism, so to speak, the number 7 has a huge symbolic, meaning, right? So, for example, the week has 7 days. God created, the world in 7, epochs or 7 phases. The number 7 means totality, right? In Judaism, that means everything, the wholesome, right? So Jesus says, guess what? You don't have to forgive up to that much, which is the whole already. It's 10 times that, right? Or 70 times 7, which is a lot more than what we can even imagine, right? To forgive. There's a very funny story that I always tell, about this. One of the most famous Brazilian mediums, right? Francis Xavier, he used to really offer, consolation, and he used to really provide counseling to people, several hours until late at night. And there's one particular instance, this woman comes to him and called Dear Chico, as he was, caringly called. Chico, I have a problem. My husband, I can't put up with him anymore. I mean, he's just, oh my God, he told me to forgive, but I don't know. I can't do it, right? It's just not working for me, right? I need some help. This is not really working for me. And then Chico carefully said, my love, my dear, right? Please remember, we have to forgive, right? We always have to forgive. Jesus asked us to forgive 70 times 7, right? I'm sure there are other opportunities for you to forgive him as well. Have you forgiven him 70 times 7? And then she stopped and looked at him and goes, so 7 times 7, 49, 490 times, a couple times a week, that will be 3 years. No, I have not, Chico. I'm sorry, I have not, right? And then she went back, thank you so much, and she went home. A couple of months later, she comes back, and her face was devastated. And then Chico, Francis Xavier was thinking to himself, what do I do now? What do I say to her, right? And he had that capacity to see spirits and talk to spirits as we're talking right here, right? Through a spiritual Zoom, as I'd like to call this spiritual way of communicating, right? As opposed to have the technology for us to communicate with it, with incarnates. So he asked Emmanuel, I gotta get some help because this lady's gonna come here. What am I gonna tell her, right? And truth be behold, she came to Chico and said, yeah, Chico, you told me to forgive her 490 times. I went back, I did the math, 3 times, 4 times a day. That's actually not 3 years. It's less than a year. And I've already forgiven him more than 1,000 times. And then he looked at Emmanuel, his spirit guide, and said, Emmanuel, what do I tell her? And Emmanuel said, Chico, tell her that it's 490 times each offense. Chico, each offense. My sister, he caringly talks to her. The Spirit's telling me here, you got to forgive him 490 times each offense. Oh, no, I'm not there yet. No, that's definitely not there. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. You gave me a great, and she went home. 2 weeks later, she comes back, but smiling. And of course, the Brazilian medium recognizes her from entering this hall. And then she says, Chico, I'm just here to say thank you. Because everything that you've taught me, all the teachings, tell Emmanuel, I thank him as well. Because at the end of the day, my husband passed away a couple of days ago. And had I had divorced him or, not forgiven him, I would never be able to forgive myself. So those teachings, those lessons were very valuable for me. And I thank you for doing that, right? Of course, this is not a talk about marriage or divorce, but at the end of the day, right? It's a funny story that really highlights that we have to forgive, no matter what, right? In this case of this lady, she was actually happy. She ended up forgiving her husband many, many times. So moving gears or changing gears a little bit, right? A lot of folks talk about forgiveness and forgetfulness, or is there any difference between forgive and forget? If we go back to the etymological definition of those words, right? Forgive and forget, right? Every time we forgive, we're giving that through somebody, right? We're giving that gift to somebody, and that somebody, it's usually ourselves. Every time we forgive, we give that gift to ourselves. We get better, right? We are the benefactors of the forgiveness, not the perpetrator, not those that offended us, not those that really, played evil with us, right? At the end of the day. But forgetting something, right? It's actually impossible. So I'll give you an example. If you're working on a shop and then your colleague that works side by side with you and they ended up sleeping on the job, and then the heavy machinery that you both operate ends up cutting one of your fingers, right? What's going to happen? You're not going to be able to forget what happened because you're going to look at your hand. You're going to have 9 fingers, 8 fingers, as many, right, that you've lost, right? It's biologically impossible to forget. And that's the piece that I'm highlighting here, I'm raising here, right? It's impossible to forget, but it's really possible to forgive. And the reason why it's impossible to forget is because our memory, right, won't let us forget. When we lose, for example, a finger, an arm, or when a child of ours breaks a crystal vase, right, we can put that vase back together, but it's still going to have some, glue in it. And yeah, it's back, but we'll still be able to see it, right? On the flip side of that, if we look at forgiveness, it really benefits those who forgive, because it gives all of us who are forgiving peace of mind, emotional balance, and mental clarity. That's what Joanna de Angelis, right, the spirit guide, talks to us. And when she mentioned, when I first read this, I said mental clarity. What does that mean, right? What's the definition of that? And later in the book, she explains that mental clarity, if I remember correctly, it's that state of emotional and psychological well-being in which we're able to use all of our cognitive and emotional capabilities. We're able to function as a person, function in a society, and we're also able to meet, right, ordinary demands of our everyday life. In plain English, right? Mental clarity is that it's us being us without being blurred by anything else. So if we really aspire to have that, forgiveness is the way to go, folks. There's no other way to get there, right? Hey, Flavio, I get it. This is great stuff, but you have no idea what I've been through. I have heard this before, by the way. I was doing this talk in a Spiritist center in the US a few years ago, back. And after I stopped, and a person comes to me and says, Flavio, you have no idea what I've been through. That's why, I don't think forgiveness is easy. That's why I put this part here on the deck that asks the question, right? Forgiveness, is it a strength or a weakness? Because that person opened my eyes, say, you know what? It doesn't matter what we go through. Because if we remember from Spiritism, and Allan Kardec talks to us about this very clearly, right? Nothing happens by mistake. We got that, right, folks? We know that. Everything that happens to us, for us, and by us, there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason for it. So if we're going through a difficult situation, if we're going through an atonement or a trial or an expiation or the passing of our loved one, right? Or the loss of a child, right? I don't like the word lose because I never lose anybody, right? If that person goes back to the spiritual realm, we eventually meet that person again in the future. We all know that, but it's gonna hurt nevertheless. We know that, right? But it's really possible to forgive, right? It's really, really possible to forgive. And as we learned from the Spirit's book, right? It's not only a sign of strength, it's also a great way to help, right? Or to, what's the word I'm looking for? To avoid future obsessions. The spirits tell Allan Kardec in the Medium's book that a lot of obsessors or obsession starts by people not forgiving. By small things here, small things there, small things everywhere. And then a lot of small things become a big thing, and then obsession kicks in, right? But at the same time, we also learn from the Spiritism that the best way, or the only way I should say, to put away these, unhappy, spirits is to really associate ourselves with, enlightened or happy spirits. And a good way of doing that, it's through forgiveness, right? Because at the end of the day, folks, I like to say that we're not really victims, right? We're not the real victims here, right? We may have induced others through some, weird behaviors in the past to act, against us, to do harm to us. Sometimes even turning the courts of divine justice, right? As we've been the authors of those crimes in the past. And then now we ended up, lamenting committing them. Or like, oh, look at this guy. How is he possible? How is it even possible for him to do that? We ask that question, right? But oftentimes it's because we've been involved in sometimes even worse situations. The point I'm trying to make is that forgiveness is very powerful. Forgiveness is very, very, very powerful. There are healing effects of forgiveness, right? There are connections between forgiveness and moral progress. There are connections between forgiveness and health, which I'm going to talk in a minute, right? And there's one part that all the religions out there, if you really study a lot of different religions, right? There's one point that we all, intersect, which is forgiveness. There are different ways of trying to build that pathway towards God, right? Theology. But if you go really down deep into the roots of religions out there, forgiveness is a huge tenet of all religions that we know out there. So it's a very powerful tool that we have at our fingertips, right? At our fingertips. So let's change gears a little bit. I'm gonna bring the study from this renowned doctor, Dr. Fred Luskin, that after a 20-year study, he wrote a huge paper that talked about forgiveness and their connections with health. That study happened between 1997 and 2002, involved 2,500 patients, and this book was published in 2003. Yes, it's a 17-year-old book, but it's a very actual, it's a very current book, so to speak. Here's what he discovered in his research. 70% decrease in feelings of emotional hurt from those who forgive. 13% decrease in long-term anger. Okay? 27% decrease in physical stress symptoms like headache, backache, sleeplessness, upset stomach. We all know, if you're in the medical field, we all know that most of the doctor visits happen because of stress-related, situations, right? If we're able to reduce our stress levels, we're really able to see doctors less, right, so to speak. 34% increase in goodwill towards the offender. Yes, forgiving is not really contemplating the offense, not agreeing with the offense, not agreeing with the offender. It's really, okay, he or she made a mistake. I get it, right? Maybe I would have made the same mistake myself if I were in his or her shoes. But at the end of the day, this is what I try to do, right? And then the most important thing that he talks about in this book, I truly believe, is the fact that folks that do not forgive carry that baggage of bitterness that's really, really toxic, right? That's really, really toxic. So when you see that, right, when you look at that, it causes a lot of issues for us. It really drives us to not have health or really goodwill, not really be able to carry out ourselves or duties in a society as husbands and wives and sons and fathers and spouses and workers or bosses or whatnot. And when you look at that, right, it really makes us have a healthier life the more we forgive. So again, when you look back to forgiveness, folks, it's a lot more than we can even think about. These are just the tip of the iceberg on the forgiveness study that we have out there. So let me bring another example of a forgiveness case that I think it's very dear to my heart. It happened in the state of North Carolina in 1984, when Ronald Cotton was coming back home. He was a baker. He worked in a bakery, and he was coming back home early in the morning, still dark, and then he was arrested by the police. And the charge was that he raped Jennifer Thompson, right? So that was actually not a fair charge. He was not, he did not rape her by all means, but then that's why he got arrested, right? Unjustly, he got arrested. He went to jail for a crime that he did not commit, right? Jennifer thought she saw him, right, as the rapist. She even picked him on the lineup, right? I'm sure you've seen that in movies and whatnot, right? In the past, victims used to go in and really point at the people that they thought committed those crimes, and then he ends up going to jail, right, for life. He gets a life sentence for a crime that he did not commit. Of course, he's devastated. His father, who's a pastor, is also devastated, right? And then he tries to fight the case. He really tries to fight the case. He got an attorney. They ended up finding a lot of mistakes that happened throughout the process, right? And then he looks at his father and says, "Father, I gotta do something here. I just can't. This is not good. I can't do this. My son, don't lose your hope, right? God's in control. He's the author of everything that happens to us. Stick around. We'll fight. Find ways to fight your sentence." So he kept on going. He kept on going. 8 years go by. So imagine, let's put ourselves in his shoes. 8 years go by, and he's serving time for a crime that he did not commit, right? It's really important to mention that Jennifer was white. Of course, she's black. This happened in 1984. Today, you're still seeing a lot of the movements, right, for racial equality. 36 years ago, things were even more difficult. This is the south of the United States. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there's still a lot of prejudice, even more so, right, than the north because of the Civil War. And this is, again, a lot of history embedded into that. And then he's able to find or appeal to get you a new trial. Okay? We'll get you a new trial. He goes to trial. He gets more, evidence on different parts of the case and whatnot. Then they go to trial. In the trial, right, Jennifer now knows that he's innocent because of all the evidence. She knows that he's innocent, right? But it took for the worst happened, and as opposed to being, sent home, the judge gives him the death sentence instead. Then he's completely devastated, right? Once again, let's put ourselves in his shoes. We get arrested for a crime we did not commit, right? We get sent to jail, 8 years go by, then there's a new trial. You are hoping that you're gonna go home free, and all of a sudden, you go back to jail with a death sentence, right? You could be killed any day. Imagine the level of stress that this man, went through. Then, in prison, he found, or he met the rapist that really did damage to Jennifer. And then the person laughed at him. Said, yeah, look at you, man. You're paying for the crime that I did. Oh. So it made fun of him. And then Ronald, in a, action of revenge, right, buys a shank, like a jail knife, right? An instrument, a very, a sharp instrument, because guess what? He wants to take the life of that individual. So he calls his dad and says, Dad, I got to talk to you. I really got to talk to you, right? I have a plan for, okay, son, let me go meet you. So his dad comes to the jail, to the penitentiary, and Ronald explained to him his plan. His father said, no, son, you can't do that. Remember, right? We're Christians. God must have a plan for this criminal injustice. I'm pretty sure something, right, there's a reason for all of us, or for you, to be in this situation. We may not know the reason, but there's definitely a reason for this to happen. Let's stay focused. Let's trust God and His will that something's going to come out of this in a better place. Ronald, because he cares so much for his father, ends up throwing away the shank, and then 4 more years go by until he's able to be exonerated through DNA evidence. So 4 years go by, and then he is released from prison. By the way, the story that I'm telling you, folks, it's described in this book, which I totally recommend, called Picking Cotton. Talks about the story of picking cotton, right? Picking him on the lineup. And look at the dichotomy here. His family, former slaves, were brought to the United States to pick cotton, right? His grandfather, great-grandfather, used to pick cotton in the farms of North Carolina. I've had the pleasure to meet Ronald Cotton in person, and he's an amazing human being. Then he is released from prison. Okay, 12 years. He's in the penitentiary for a crime that he did not commit. Okay, 12 years. Then he's released, and then he talks to his lawyer. I want to meet Jennifer. His lawyer totally advises against him, against doing that. You shouldn't meet her. What do you want to do that for? What's her agenda? I don't think it's a good idea. Tries to talk him down, but he's adamant. I want to meet her. Okay, I can tell her lawyer, but I can't promise anything. Please tell her I want to meet her. So Jennifer's lawyer tells her, and she says, I'd like to meet him too. I'd like to say I'm sorry. I ruined the guy's life for 12 years. And I'd like to say I'm sorry to him as well. So they decide to meet in a neutral place. Right? Again, still in North Carolina. Jennifer now, she got married, right? She had 2 kids. And then that's why her last name is the Jennifer Thompson Canino. That's her husband's last name. She had two kids already. And then when they saw each other, right, in this place, they hugged for 21 minutes. Let me repeat that. When they saw each other after 12 years of this whole situation, right, they hugged each other for 21 minutes. She had never talked to him ever. He had never talked to her ever. She made a mistake. she pointed it to him, which caused him to go to jail, almost get killed, right? Criminal justice and whatnot, injustice and whatnot. But let's put ourselves on Jennifer's shoes, right? You were young, you were scared, you were in a place that you thought that he was the person, right? You were induced by the police back then to do these things. And then a crime that happened. Going back to Ronald's father, God must have a plan for this criminal injustice. And then they developed this friendship to the point that now they're best friends. Jennifer had a third son, a third kid, right, child, and Ronald is the child's godfather, right? They developed this great relationship, and now they go all over the world sharing their story and really talking against the death penalty, right? So when you and I go talk against the death penalty, who is this guy? What does he know? What does he do, right? But when they talk against death penalty, it's a totally different punch, right? It's a different weight when they do that. And look, I want you to highlight this picture here, the bottom picture, that he's laughing, she's holding his arm. Folks, they're best friends now. They're best friends. He is the godfather of her son, right? They spend Sundays together. They barbecue together. And they come from two different realities, right, in North Carolina. So all that to say that it doesn't matter what happened to us. It doesn't matter how difficult it is to forgive, right? We are able to do so. In the example that I shared with you of the Armenian nurse, in the example of Roland Cotton, right, there's always a way for us to forgive. But not simply forgive for saying that we forgive, right? It's a forgiveness as Jesus told us or taught us, right? Which is a little more interesting than just forgiving, as we learn from the dictionary, right? As Joanna de Angelis mentions, when Jesus, the psychotherapist, the doctor, the psychologist par excellence, taught us the indistinct, unconditional, and constant forgiveness, right? What does that mean? Indistinct, right? It doesn't matter what it is, we gotta do it. Doesn't matter what the hurt or the offense, it does not, there's no distinction. We forgive when somebody cuts off in front of us on the freeway. We also forgive if somebody does something harmful to one of our loved ones. Yes, we have to forgive, right? We don't forgive if, I'm only going to forgive if that person calls me back. I'm only going to forgive if that person really asks for forgiveness. No, unconditional. There's no condition, period, right? That's the forgiveness that he's telling us or teaching us. And constantly forgiving. Every day, all the time, right? Somebody does something to us, yeah, that's okay, I get it, let's move on. In this teaching, folks, Jesus highlighted one of the most beautiful behaviors, which are responsible for integral health and mental balance. So if you really want to be healthy, if you really want to be mentally, balanced or mentally healthy, it is through forgiveness, right? Yes, it's great that we take care of our bodies. It's great that we go to the gym. It's great that we go to the doctor every year. All those are great things. But if we don't forgive, we're missing the most beautiful behavior that's responsible for our health, our whole health, and our mental balance. That's why forgiveness is connected with well-being. That's why when we put these two things together, right, it starts to make sense. That's why it was Jesus' last words. Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing, right? And then if you can really maybe get a cake recipe for us to stick in our heads, right? For us to live tonight. Emmanuel talks to us about Forgiveness is the best vaccine against the hate disease that creates a lot of heart problems, creates a lot of cardiovascular issues, right? Forgiveness is the best peace formula. If you're looking for peace, that's the best formula, right? It doesn't matter if the world's in chaos, quote unquote chaos, right? We know everything's under control, but sometimes we think that nobody's in control, right? I like to tell my friends and my family that I trust the author of this story. He knows what's going on, right? Even in these days of coronavirus and pandemic, I still trust him. I'll do my part. I'll take care of my loved ones, and I'll be careful and whatnot. But I bluntly trust the author that everything is under control. Everything is moving towards helping us as a society progress towards the future, right? Forgiveness really generates the greatest profit, folks, right? Because if we don't forgive, we're gonna start owing a lot of debts for the future, and our accounting down the road, it's gonna be negative, right? If you're into accounting. And then, of course, when we forgive others, we'll live a more balanced, healthier, and happier life. These folks that I told you, or I shared stories with you, the Armenian nurse, Ronald Cotton, Jennifer, right? They all made great examples of forgiveness. But I'll end with one very important example that it's critical for us to live a well-balanced life, which is to forgive ourselves. I'll be remiss if I don't mention that. Oftentimes, we can forgive others, but we can't forgive ourselves. Oh, I spoke too much. Oh, I didn't call that person, right? And I should have called at that time. Oh, I didn't do this. I didn't do that. Oh, I made a mistake. I said to you. It doesn't matter what we do. We're all learning. We're all marching, as I told you before, we're all at the same evolutionary level, so to speak, right? Maybe some folks have taken a couple of steps more than we have, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. We're all on this together, right? And by being together, guess what? We looked around and say, you know what? It has to be good for both of us. One of the things that I'll mention, right, in this Black Lives Matter movement is that I'm very happy to see that a lot of non-Black folks are marching, right, towards racial equality. Because folks are realizing that until it's good for everybody, right, until it's good for everybody, until the world that we live in is really good for everyone, it's not going to be good for us, right? And we need to really go after that, right? So it gives me a very positive mindset when I look at these things and I start to really stitch those pieces together. That helps me forgive more, helps me practice more forgiveness, helps me look at forgiveness with a very different set of eyes. Instead of a weakness, but a strength instead. Instead of a failure, but an act of, evolve, right? As an evolved spirit. Because if you remember, you may have heard, Gandhi, when he was asked, Gandhi, do you forgive your enemies, right? And if you look at Gandhi's story, it was a very difficult story. He really protested against violence, a non-violent protest against violence. He was thrown away of moving train a couple of times. He was beaten by, British soldiers. So he had a very tough life, right? As we know it. And then when this reporter or journalist asked him, Gandhi, do you forgive your enemies? He said, no, I don't forgive. Journalist was like, whoa, what do you mean you don't forgive? I don't forgive because I don't have enemies. When I read that for the first time, I was really impressed. And I truly believe that one day we'll be able to be at that level. But before we're there, folks, we have to forgive all the way in. We have to forgive. There's no other way, right? That's why it's one of the most inspiring messages from the gospel. It's one of the most important, behaviors as we learned from Jesus, right? The psychotherapist par excellence. And the more we do it, the easier it gets, like a muscle, right? When we go to the gym the first time, maybe it's difficult, 2 days difficult, 4 days difficult. Maybe you go to the gym for 6 months, it becomes a lot easier. The more we practice forgiveness, the easier it gets. That's what Spiritism teaches us, folks. Right? So that being said, I truly hope this has been helpful to give a couple of ideas of why forgiveness is really the recipe or the most important recipe for us to live healthier and better lives overall.